everyone. I'm Nikki.
And I'm Gabe.
And we are
the Theme Park Duo.
And we have a very special episode for you today before we get into Season 6 of our show, the Theme Park Duo podcast.
Yes, we actually have someone very special for this very special episode. We have Jeff DePaoli, host of Dizney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. And he asked us to do a little switcheroo episode, so you could hear one of our episodes on his podcast feed, and you could hear his episode that we're about to let you listen to on our podcast feed. We've been friends with Jeff for quite a while now, and we thought this would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so everyone just buckle up and get ready for some Disney fun.
Essentially, I mean, this is a fantastic episode. Jeff has Susan Bonds on the show with him to discuss a lot of the amazing attractions that she helped bring to life at Disney parks. We know you guys are going to love this episode, so make sure you enjoy it, and also make sure you subscribe to Disney Coast to Coast after you're done listening, because you're going to want to tune in for so much more. But let's not wait any longer, and let's tune in to Jeff's episode interviewing Susan Bonds.
Is your magic meter running low? Well, we've got a cure for you. Welcome to Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePaoli, and today on the show I have special guest and Imagineer Susan Bonds joining me to discuss the various projects she's worked on with the Walt Disney Company. Susan has played key roles in bringing us iconic attractions like the Indiana Jones Adventure in Disneyland Park, the extraterrestrial alien encounter in Magic Kingdom, Mission Space in Epcot, and so much more.
Prepare for some insight. You've tuned in to an exclusive DCTC interview.
Susan, thank you so much for joining me here today on Disney Coast to Coast. A pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, you've had a wonderful career with Walt Disney Imagineering, and, you actually started with Imagineering in Orlando, is that correct?
That's correct. I was going to Georgia Tech, I was getting my engineering degree, and because I'm one of 5 kids, I had to work my way through college. So they had a cooperative education program, and I signed up to work on Epcot. And so I got to work on Epcot from about a year before groundbreaking to a year after opening. So from 80 to 83, the end of 83. And I got to see so many things. It was actually called WED back then, although the WED employees were still called Imagineers. But I got to work in the WED building behind Epcot, and it was a pretty amazing, when I went down there the first time, I got an office on Main Street right above the Penny Arcade.
Oh,
and
wow.
Just the Magic Kingdom was there. That was all that was there. I mean, like, they had Central Foods and, they had like Lake Buena Vista, they had the infrastructure there, but it was the only theme park. So I got to see the building of the monorail to Epcot, and, and then of course the main resorts were there, the Contemporary and the Polynesian. And it was just an amazing time to like see that property and get to know that property, just with one park on it. Now when you go back, it's transformed so much. But yes, I mean, it was, I think I was there during the 10-year anniversary of the opening of the Magic Kingdom, and I remember the parade. I used to watch it from my window above the Penny Arcade. It was just, It was a really magical time, and so many people there, so many focused on bringing to life this dream of Epcot, experimental prototype community of tomorrow. And I got to work on 6 of the attractions there, as well as do some overall park-wide system stuff. So I got to work on Imagination, Transportation, Spaceship Earth, Energy, Land, and Communicore, a little bit of Communicore. So I was mostly Future World, obviously. And it was just an amazing, amazing time. I mean, at the time I didn't realize, I was meeting Disney legends, right? Because everybody was just so focused on making this dream come true. But one of my fondest memories is Dick Nunes called everyone together to come over to American Adventure when they had the whole carousel working and they were going to do the first show. And I remember, watching the final song, Spread Your Golden Wings.
Yeah.
The theater was just packed with people who had just been nonstop, every day for years, working on the stream. And when Walt Disney came across the screen, everyone just started clapping and crying. And we didn't even pay any attention to the rest of the movie. It was just such a, hey, yes, we got over the hump, we did it, kind of moment, even though I know there's a lot of discussions about if that was, Walt's complete vision, and obviously people took it over, but it was a really, really interesting time to see this concept of Imagineering where people put story together with the experience. You had all the engineering disciplines, you had safety, you had infrastructure, you had maintenance, you had all the design disciplines, and you had these creative directors, who every detail mattered, when you're creating immersive experience. I remember the landscape architect showing me the plan for Future World and explaining to me that this half of, on this half of Cunicore, is the left side of the brain and this half is the right side of the brain. So like curvy lines, straight lines, angles, just like the attention to detail. I mean, I'm not sure who would have ever picked up on all that, except for people know that it's special, right? Because there's such an attention to detail to it. So at the end of, I think in December of 1983, that's when I finished my tour with Florida, and I graduated in 84 and they offered me a job, but at the time the company was just in a really state of transition with leadership. So I went into aerospace, and then I came back in 1990 for the Disney decade after Frank Wells and Michael Eisner had come back to the company, and they announced, hey, we're going to build on every continent and we're going to do all this amazing innovation. And so I was in Burbank working for Lockheed on small quantity, specialty aircraft, which is very similar to ride vehicles, right? Because it's small quantity, safety is like number one. So anyway, I think I called and sent my resume in on Wednesday, and by Friday I was working back at Imagineering. I never forgot about those special people. So after a stint in aerospace, I went back for the Disney decade.
Yeah, so you were there for two major times. I mean, the opening of Epcot and then that Disney decade.
Tokyo Disneyland opened almost at the same time as Epcot. I don't know if you remember that. But so we did a little engineering work on it, but most of that work was obviously done by the team in Tokyo. But yeah, so we went from Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom to Disneyland, the Magic Kingdom, Epcot, and Tokyo Disneyland.
And at this time, you were an industrial engineer with Imagineering? Yeah. Was that?
I got an MBA and, did some focusing on man-machine systems. And that was kind of when I went into aerospace, I worked for the Skunk Works, so I can't really talk too much about what I did. But, a lot of it was very, very laying the groundwork for innovative ride systems, which is kind of, when I came back, that's what was assigned to me, is like things that had never been done before. And that was what was really interesting to me about the whole Imagineering process, because they had this very robust design process for, creating immersive entertainment, that the formula that they had created for Disneyland, and they were, spreading their wings and spreading it out. But then they also had a real appetite for what can we do? How can we keep surprising our guests? And how do we make it more magical? How do we get closer to you in the ride envelope? All of those different things, how do we, recreate moments more accurately, when you're bringing these stories to life? So when I came back to Imagineering for the Disney decade in 1990, one of the first attractions that I was assigned to was the alien encounter. I don't know if you remember this.
I do, but before we get there, I just want to touch on a couple things, because gosh, you just talked about so much in Florida, and I just want to mention to the listeners, I think a lot of people don't recognize the fact that Walt Disney Imagineering does have offices still to this day in Orlando. I think everybody just thinks Glendale, California, and that's not the case.
No, the great thing about Florida is it was set up to be its own city. Like Buena Vista is a city, and it operates almost like this very, very unique place. So unlike Disneyland, where, you know, Anaheim's all around it, really when you get on the Disney property, you're kind of like you're going to a magical place. And so Imagineers were there. They were in a temporary building, but they've been there ever since the Magic Kingdom was built. And not only do they do more and more, you know, location central design for these parks, which people have maintained and creatively, you know, kept up for all the years. But so they're very familiar with their audiences, and they're very familiar with the park and the flow of the park. In fact, because I was an industrial and systems engineer, one of the last things I did in 1983 is I did the operational standards for Epcot and for the Magic Kingdom, which just basically means you understand how the guest flow works, you know, the timing of, you know, people flowing into pre-shows and filling them up, and people flowing into theaters and filling them up, and like where guest patterns are. Everything all the way down to restroom patterns are studied by Imagineers. And so like they have these operational standards that inform design. So there's a lot. When I think about Walt Disney World, I do think of it as its own place that's so unique in the world. And I think it was set up that way. You know, they bought all that land secretly. You know, it has its own infrastructure. It has its own everything, really. It's so self-sufficient. There's so many restaurants. There's now so many hotels. It is like running a major city, you know, so you're not just running the park, you're running this whole operation. And, you know, hundreds of millions of people are visiting it. So like, I think Disney makes it look easy, and it's not easy. It takes a lot of effort. And I think the Imagineers on location really understand, and it's not just on location in Florida. There's Imagineers on location in Japan, and there's Imagineers on location in Paris, and there's Imagineers on location in Hong Kong, and in you know, obviously Disneyland, that are at the park, that really are very familiar with the day-to-day, you know, how are we maintaining not only the production quality, but the guest experience.
Yeah, there's two things I always like to ask Imagineers, and I've really never gotten a solid answer. So let's see if you're the one who can do this for me, because
Hey.
I always wonder, if you work for Imagineering, are you an Imagineer? Or is it once you hit a certain level working at Imagineering, you are an Imagineer?
No, if you work for Imagineering, you are an Imagineer.
So if you're an assistant to somebody, you're still an Imagineer.
Because it takes a village, right? You know, the teams of people, like, I know we're going to talk about things later on, but, you know, when I was working on Indiana Jones, there's 400 people working on that attraction. It takes all of the people and all of the pieces working together. So it'd be impossible to say, well, this piece isn't important or that piece isn't important, because the group of people are working together towards one goal, which is making fantastic entertainment and making people smile. So like, whether you're, you know, the janitor sweeping up Main Street, or the Imagineer who's designing a new ride system, I think it all works together. But Imagineering is anyone who works at WDI. That's my answer, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay. And then the other question I had about that is, for me, you know, I always love the stories of when Walt was starting Wet Enterprises, and he took people who were like animators and was like, guess what? You're building rides now. And so a lot of people who were working at Imagineering or Wet Enterprises at the time were really doing like a grand amount of things. They weren't very specific niche talents. Mm-hmm. And at some point, Walt Disney Imagineering became a place where I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like very specific niche skills is what they're after these days, as opposed to somebody who can, you know, hey, Exitencio, write this song and then figure out the figure or whatever. So do you know when, and or perhaps were you around when it started kind of zoning in or lasering in on niche skills? And or do you agree with me?
I'm not sure I 100% agree with you. Now, I was a project manager and a show producer and a creative director. So one of the things that was, our job as Imagineers, as a leader leading projects, is to constantly be communicating the vision so that people are adding to it. So I do think that it requires a lot of disciplines and a lot of specialty and focus. But I also feel that there is a very good cross-section of Imagineers who understand the creative intent of the entire experience and are making sure that that doesn't get lost in translation. I think that by definition, as it becomes more defined as an industry, it's easier to recognize that there are these specialties within the specialty. Within creating a theme park, there's all these specialties. But I also think that there are, and part of the success of Imagineering is having people who understand the vision of the guest experience. And I would say that maybe a different way of saying what I just said is that the biggest thing that I learned at Imagineering, and I had the opportunity to work with some of the original people who worked with Walt on both Disneyland and the World's Fair. And the greatest thing that they taught me is that your focus is on the guest experience. You're not there to say, oh, I'm an expert in, it's going to be red or blue. You're there to say, how's the guest going to feel when they look at this? And you're making decisions based on, either guest safety or guest comfort or immersion or story or things that are being communicated to the guest. And I think that focus on product and that focus on, the guest experience is really what I think has kept Imagineering so unique for so long.
Yeah. Now let's get to some of your attractions, because you had mentioned the first thing you worked on when you came back was the infamous extraterrestrial alien encounter. And oh my gosh. Well, first of all, this was, people may not know, but this was originally intended for Disneyland Park, right?
We were working on a project called Tomorrowland 2055. And this was in 1990. And the alien encounter was going to go where Mission to Mars, that Mission to Mars building was, which I think ultimately got replaced. I'm not sure what it got replaced.
Pizza restaurant.
Yeah, the pizza restaurant. So this is where Alien Encounter was going to go, because that was kind of a theater experience. And this was a theater in the round experience. And really, Alien Encounter came from a couple of things. A lot of times when you're creating, it's like, okay, well, how can we, pull this amazing experience and story? How can we make it come to life? But you're also looking at, well, how is technology really influenced? I call that the push and the pull. So one of the technologies that we were very interested in was binaural sound, and the idea that you could use directional speakers in a way that could give you, sensation of somebody standing behind you, somebody talking, somebody breathing, somebody slobbering, all those things that binaural sound could do. And then the idea of creating a next generation theater show where you could use things like complete darkness. And I think that, it was the goal to do a truly heart-stopping, I'll stop, short of the word scary, but, this heart-stopping theater in the round that used binaural sound. And one of the scariest things about it is that we had a restraint. We had a literal, it was like a roller coaster restraint that was over you. And, there's nothing scarier than feeling like somebody's behind you and you can't move. So I think we were successful in creating the heart-stopping part of it. I think that in retrospect, whether it was Disneyland or Walt Disney World, it probably didn't belong in the Magic Kingdom. I think it would have been better if it had been like an MGM Studio Tours or something where the expectation was a little bit different.
Were there any of those conversations like, hey, maybe Magic Kingdom isn't the best place? And how did it end up in Magic Kingdom considering the original idea was Disneyland?
I think that, so there was a lot of discussion around what to do with Tomorrowland. And not only did I work on Tomorrowland 2055, but I also worked with Eddie Sato on, reimagining Tomorrowland for Tokyo. And we worked on something called Sci-Fi City. So there was a lot of conversation. And then Tim Delaney reimagined Tomorrowland as Discoveryland, inspired by Jules Verne and that whole turn of the century innovation period. I think the challenge with Tomorrowland is like when you put something out there that's supposed to be the future, it's instantly dated because the Imagineering process takes a couple years for something to become a reality. So you're outdating yourself, and who's to say one vision of the future for one group of people is the same for another group of people? And so I think that was the challenge with reimagining Tomorrowland. It wasn't that these individual attraction ideas weren't really cool or interesting or great. It was just that, well, what are we really creating here? That's why I personally liked Eddie's solution. It's like, let's celebrate science fiction. Some of that work was just really, really amazing. And even like when they put Star Tours in, it's like, okay, well, that's sci-fi come to life. It's like, all right, well, so we're focusing this area on science fiction. It's like, that could be really, really cool. And I think ultimately that some of the changes they made to Space Mountain, I think the Star Wars Space Mountain is probably one of the best ones that I've ever seen.
I love it.
So yeah, I don't know, like my take on Alien Encounter was it probably didn't belong in that park. And my other takeaway is Tomorrowland is hard,
Yeah.
And I understand because I've actually had Marty Sklar and Bob Gurr come talk to my team about the World's Fair and, what their goals and objectives were for the 64-65 World's Fair. And I think that people thought about the future differently, but now we all have digital devices, at our fingertips. We're playing games and watching movies and, doing stuff on our phones all at the same time. And so it's harder to get a concrete vision, and so that's why I think sci-fi comes to life. That's why I think like Galaxy's Edge, I think is brilliant.
Would you say like the full future and everybody on screens and stuff? I can just remember as a kid going through attractions at Epcot and seeing people, animatronics on tablets and video phones and stuff and being like, what future is this? Sounds amazing. And I'm like, and now we're there.
Like, I don't know if you remember on the Horizons ride, which I actually tore down to build Mission Space, but there was a scene where they had a birthday party and it was holographic and Zoom and FaceTime like there's nobody's business. And I'm pretty sure we're not that far away from holograms of each other. But it was just, again, a different time where you could put things out there that seemed like, oh, that could never happen. But now it's harder. Now it's harder to put something out there and think, well, like it's to me, it's much easier to take a rich, defined world like Star Wars or sci-fi in general, and like that, there's a lot to pull from there.
Yeah, so Alien Encounter did eventually open in 95 at Magic Kingdom, and same year you opened the Indiana Jones adventure in Disneyland.
That's
so
right.
Were you working on these simultaneously?
I only spent once Alien Encounter went to Florida. We had done the majority of the design work, so we passed it off to them and they built that. And I was assigned the Indiana Jones adventure. And I think I started as the project manager because I had an engineering degree and an MBA, which at the time was required at Imagineering to run a project. And then I got won over by both Tony Baxter and George Lucas to the creative side, to really understanding story. It wasn't really until Indiana Jones where I put both sides of my brain together, the right side and the left side, and understood that it's not just about the technology that's creating these attractions, but it's about the story and it's about the role that you're giving the audience. So Indiana Jones, I took that project over in either late 90 or early 91, and then, went all the way through opening, which was in 95. And that was my first project going from beginning to end, and really seeing the whole process. But like, I got to work with amazing people, Skip Lang, who'd done all of the rock work in Tokyo Disneyland, and which was an amazing, amazing art director. Tony, of course, who was coming off Disneyland Paris, and had done amazing attractions like Big Thunder Mountain and Splash Mountain, and he was just an amazing kid at heart. I got to work with, when we were putting Indiana Jones in, one of the biggest challenges is that the ride building out in the parking lot, and we had like 16 feet between the Jungle Cruise and Pirates of the Caribbean, and it needed to go in Adventureland. I mean, what are you going to do? Put Indiana Jones not in Adventureland? Of course you're not. So we did like over 50 layouts of like trying to figure out how to get a queue in there, and ultimately we ended up having to realign 200 lineal feet of the Jungle Cruise, and so I got to walk the Jungle Cruise with the original landscaper, Bill Evans of Disneyland. I think he was either in his late 70s or early 80s at the time. And he was telling me he remembered where every tree came from. And he ended up talking us into relocating 27 trees as part of this realignment because he loved Disneyland. He loved that landscaping. And he wanted to maintain the integrity of what they built, which had been growing for 40 years, right? Or 35 years at the time. And so, no, it was 40 years, by the time we opened. And so that was again, a great privilege to be in the presence of someone who was there, when they did it the first time. Right.
Yeah.
And to just hear directly from them, some of the decisions that they had made and why, and it affected us. It affected my team. Because like I said, not only did we save the trees, but I think it just affected the whole way. I know we went out and started scouring the state and then even beyond the state lines to try to find every piece of bamboo that we could find, because we knew we were going to be wedged in between, vegetation that had been growing for 40 years. And we didn't want to just seem like odd man out. Right.
Sure.
So it did affect our strategy, working with some of these original Imagineers and creating this really unusual, and I think the first of its kind, queue experience, where you're walking in the footsteps of Indiana Jones and you're really building anticipation before you get on a thrill ride. I think it was one of the most successful story experience-driven queues, and part of it was born out of necessity. It's like, well, we got to get all the way back out there, and so that's sometimes how magic can happen.
Yeah. Now, a lot of us have seen concept art for Indiana Jones Adventure where at one point Jungle Cruise and the Disneyland Railroad were going to be going through it.
And the mine.
In the mine train. Wow. So how far into that process was it kind of nixed? Was it like decided early on, hey, this is not doable, or did it get pretty far? I
mean, I think the vision was it's a huge multi-billion-dollar franchise, and they'd already had great success with Star Tours. And I think that there was a lot of expectations put on Indy. They're still making the movies. So I think that there was a lot of expectations put on it. There was a lot of the early concept work was really like, how far could we go? How much could we integrate in? And actually, I think it was a precursor to some of the things that are happening now, which is how can you take assets that exist for one purpose and repurpose them in a different way. So like having the Jungle Cruise boat go through a new attraction, all of a sudden you've got a new Jungle Cruise too, and having, the train, drive. It was just the idea was that, well, okay, we're not just putting something new in here, but we're going to revitalize everything. And actually, while I was working on Indy, Eddie actually took and redid some of Adventureland and did some really, really cool things out in Adventureland to make it all seem more integrated. When I got put on the project, that was kind of one of the reasons, is to say, okay, well, here's what we're really going to spend. And so you need to make these trade-off decisions about, and the minecart ride did get built in Disneyland Paris. So that work didn't get thrown away. And I think that like I said, on the 56th or whatever, 57th, whatever plan it was of getting back to the building, I think we had to spend a certain amount of money on this immersive queue. So then we were kind of dictated on, okay, we know what the ride's going to take. We know to deliver on the movie experience. We know what the queue's going to take. So some of those decisions were easier to make because the train ride was already fantastic and the Jungle Cruise was already fantastic. And so, but those were some of the first things that I took on, the challenge of getting under a budget number. That's the fun of Imagineering. There's a blue sky process. Really, you're not thinking about, is it possible or how much is it going to cost? You're just dreaming. And I think that's why Disney got as far as they have, right? Imagineers have gotten as far as they have because they do allow things to gestate. And so even though you might say, oh, okay, well, that never happened, But the fact that it did happen really instilled in the team a lot of value and trade-off decisions that were really going to deliver. So like you take things where, okay, maybe not everything's going to fire on all cylinders, but as you kind of distill it down, kind of centrifuge the idea down, everything you have is a blockbuster when you get to the end. Very successful.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's my favorite ride in Disney. Well, Rise of the Resistance is up there with it as well. But I mean, Indiana Jones, it has aged beautifully. It's still a major e-ticket attraction in that park. It's crazy. I had heard, tell me, this may just totally be rumor, but I had heard back when Disney MGM Studios opened, that Stunt Spectacular was supposed to be super limited time, and they were actually going to put this ride there as well. Do you know if that's factual at all?
I never heard that.
Okay.
You know, when you're working on an attraction, it does consume your life. So the thing that I was really tracking in Florida was Tower of Terror, which I thought was a hugely innovative, very original ride. And I was, trying to stay in contact with some of that team because they did some amazing problem solving on that ride. So just from a engineering perspective, I thought it was amazing, but also the story and the environment that they created for that, and that the incorporation of the IP of the Twilight Zone. I mean, there were so many. So that was kind of the thing that I was watching in Florida. Mm-hmm. But I didn't hear that. I mean, I knew there was a stunt show, but I never heard that specific thing.
Now, I truly, truly love this attraction, so please don't be offended by this question. But there's one thing that I've always questioned about Indiana Jones Adventure, and whenever I question things, I'm always like, was this a conversation that was had? I'm always curious. So, to me, the greatest thing about the attraction is the ride system. I mean, it was brand spanking new, mind-blowing that the whole, what's the word I'm looking for? The simulator on the track.
Yeah, a moving motion based three-dimensional sets.
Yes. So we'd never experienced that before. And, whenever there's a new trick, I always think of it as a magic trick or an illusion. Mm-hmm. And the worst thing that you can do is give up that trick, show the trick or illusion. And there's this grand moment in the attraction where you turn the corner, you're riding down this quote unquote stairs, and in front of you is the grand room. You see the bridge, and it's timed so that you see another vehicle crossing the bridge at that exact moment. And in that moment, I've always just been like, oh, they're giving away the trick because we're seeing the motion simulator. We're basically seeing the magic behind our ride vehicle.
Right.
And is that something that was ever talked about, or was it like nobody will notice, or I don't know.
So the Indiana Jones ride is, a little over between 3 and 4 minutes, and every bit of it was scored at Todd A.O. with a 90-piece orchestra. And I can tell you that the programming of that ride, which took about really 8 months, we did a simulation of that ride, is that at every 10-second interval, we have all of these tools in our tool chest. It's like, okay, there's offboard effects, there's offboard and audio animatronics. There's onboard motion. There's onboard music. There's all of these things that could happen that even myself, riding the vehicle every night, programming it, no, it didn't take anything away from the experience. So like, I think in the adrenaline of the moment, when you think about, that's the first time that you really jerk around and you're moving down the steps. Most people are just holding on.
Yeah,
so I
guess it's true.
Because you are a Disney person and because you've probably been on it so many times, it's like it's apparent to you. But I think the general public going through it, no, they're just like, and I'll tell you how I know that. And this is an insider story. When we were, working with the ride system, and it was an amazing ride system that was developed out of Imagineering R&D. It was an amazing vehicle that they turned over to the creative team for Indy to match with the Indy IP. We were thinking, okay, this vehicle is so versatile that we picked like a dozen places along the ride where we could program multiple programs. And in fact, if you ever saw the press material from opening, it was one of the big talking points, right? There's over 100,000 combinations of this ride, of like all these different things that could happen at these multiple places. There were 50 onboard show control computers, and they were syncing up, and, everything from different lines of dialogue. But the reality is nobody noticed. And why did nobody notice? Because you're on a adventure, an Indiana Jones adventure. It's like, we were up, we were down, we're on a Jeep, there's snakes, there's bugs. That's what people took away. The nuances of that kind of differences in motion base, even though we could have thought it was cool because we've been on the ride for 8 months and we were thinking, oh, this is cool. Nobody noticed. So I feel like you noticing the motion base and how it looked on the Jeep going across the bridge is probably, you're one of the rare few, because people are just holding on. They're screaming, they're yelling, they're having a good time, as they should.
And I can confirm that, the first dozen times I certainly wasn't noticing that. So you're right. It's the annual pass holder mentality, I guess. So you've seen some of the updates since its original opening, and I'm curious if are any specific updates that really excite you to see the attraction plussed in that way.
I mean, it is a very Imagineering thing to basically birth this baby and then you hand it over and say, Godspeed to you. Now we actually were a little under budget on Indy. So we spent some time programming because it was a very new attraction, and there was a lot of different types of motion bases because you had 6 degrees of freedom, but you also had a back end on the vehicle that could kick out. So there was a lot of study of the motion on the body, and there was a lot of modifications to the program. But I think for me, it still delivers on the promise of Indiana Jones. I love the queue. I love the fact that our, prop designer, Pat Burke, built the ladders in white oak because that's what they had in 1938. I love just seeing how the vegetation has grown up. I love the story as you're walking down the queue, and the, in the room with the obelisk of doom, we actually put the initials of a lot of people who made the attraction possible, including Frank Wells. His initials are in there, mine are in there. It's just really
cool.
Special. And I feel like once I get on that vehicle, I know if I really study it, I know there are things that bother me that are off. There are things that excite me that are new. But for the most part, it's just a great thrill ride. It still delivers on that idea of bringing the movie to life. So I would say in my heart of hearts, I probably, because I moved down there the last 2 years and just lived in the Ramada end, and was at the site almost 24 hours a day. I probably, in my mind, still remember it on opening day, wow. Even on it now. So I'm not disappointed in it, and I'm happy that people still enjoy it, and and that they are keeping up with it. And if they do something new, as they should, technology evolves, and if they can make something more magical or more immersive, I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, I went that opening year to that attraction, and gosh, to say it was ahead of its time is an understatement. And even to this day, it's one of my favorite ride systems of all time. I just think it's an absolute blast. So
thank you.
But yeah, we talked about some pretty scary attractions you did, especially Alien Encounter. But I got to tell you, the scariest one for me, due to some claustrophobic situations, is Mission Space. And oh my gosh, talk about a ride system.
Right.
How did this come about? And as an engineer, this must have been such an exciting project for you.
It was exciting because I actually had worked on a few components for the space shuttle, and so I obviously wanted to become an engineer because I remember where my family was when John Glenn, when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Obviously when Glenn went up and but when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, that was the moment I decided to become an engineer. And
wow.
So for me, bringing Imagineering and engineering and space together it seemed like a natural. It seemed like, okay, I've been moving towards this my whole life. Now, I'm sure this isn't a secret to you, but they had wanted to have space as a topic in Epcot from the very beginning. And so I think I was like the 15th, creative director, show producer that they had put on it. And so there was kind of like, is this a curse project? There was kind of that aspect on it. And then there was also this kind of real excitement of like, okay, I've watched, these astronauts, and I've actually seen, I had been to most of the space centers, but of course, once Disney had an attraction, we got to go to all the NASA space centers and look at everything. These spaces are small, these guys are brave, these men and women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I talked to 55 shuttle astronauts, and I was thinking, we already hit Star Trek. I mean, this is the most diverse, amazing group of people, super smart, very motivated from all different walks of life, all genders, all races. We were already at Star Trek. So I remember thinking that when I was talking with, doing research for space. But I think that the moment for me where space really came together, because even once I took on space as a subject and started blue skying it, I worked with different creatives and different people, and there were a lot of ideas that were hanging around, everything from R&D to, Tony worked on it for a while, Eddie worked on it for a while, Barry Braverman, like all these different people who had just ideas about where it should go. But when it came together for me, I was actually working with the experiential ride group, and we had been told, again, problem solving, sometimes adversity can put you in a box that really makes you bust out of it. So we've been told that we had to keep a certain percentage of the Horizons building. Well, you're familiar with that building. It had just a motion ride that had gone through it that was traveling at very low speeds. There was not the opportunity to really get anything out of it. So we were talking about what were those moments? If you were going to, again, go back to walking in the footsteps of these astronauts, what are the things that really are awe-inspiring? And so we were talking about liftoff. We were talking about that moment where you get into space and you're weightless and it just feels so otherworldly. And we were talking about, being out and seeing from a different perspective. And then, of course, re-entry and landing. And one of the ride engineers, his name is Dan Armstrong, he drew a spiral on the board and basically said, the way you get this sense of vertical travel is you create this motion that's like a centrifuge motion. And then from there, we were like looking at different roller coaster ride configurations. But then again, we started talking about, well, what if let's just go up. We went up to Dayton, Ohio, and just rented some time on the 20-foot arm centrifuge, took a VCR and a TV, a monitor, and just strapped in and had like the flight surgeon right there and just started playing around. And it was just like literally one of the most creative periods I've ever been through, because you're taking something that's very real. And but again, the goal was once we hit on, the goal is vertical travel, right? Mm-hmm. Then we started honing in on, and there were a lot of people that, really came in. And again, once you've got the idea, you start squishing it and pushing it. So we finally just said, hey, you can't beat a 20-foot arm centrifuge, but there's no ride capacity there. We got to have 2,400 people an hour. So, another ride engineer, Joel was his name. He said, well, let's put it on a turntable. Let's have 10 of them on a turntable. So it was like that kind of like, while we're creating the experience and we're pushing and pulling the ride system to be, and then we ultimately built a prototype in Philadelphia, right outside of Philadelphia, and just started programming, started playing around with how do you get that sense of motion. And we wanted it to be, I'll tell you that because you've been on it, we wanted it to feel like you do throttle back way before 3Gs, which the shuttle astronauts throttle back at 3Gs. Now, it takes them 8.5 minutes to get through the Earth's atmosphere. Of course, you're doing it in like 30 seconds, 37 seconds. But we did want it to be grounded in, that's why International Space Station, that's why you see all of those amazing quotes. The courtyard itself was designed by this really great architect named Mark Imberg. And, my direction was, hey, let's have no perpendicular lines, even though it was on that side of Communicore, just going back to, my Epcot days. It's like, no, when you get in there, let's make it really seem like you're in space and you're just seeing all these curves and these spheres. And I love the exterior of that building. And I remember at the time when the concept architect really Mark came back with, this idea and the spire moving up and, it all being done out of, basically curved steel. And people were like, well, how do you do that? They were building the Experience Music Project in Seattle. And I don't know if you remember that wavy roof. And we went up there to see, and we're like, hey, they're doing it. You can do it too. So it is kind of interesting when you have all of these people, you're saying, okay, because space is also, the expectations on space. I remember just from a pure research point of view, we went down to Disneyland and stood outside of Space Mountain and interviewed people as they came out. And we said things, we asked them questions like, did you remember the moon landing? Or where do you think we should go next? Do you believe that there's life out there, other life out there? Where do you think the universe begins? Where does it? I mean, you could not script the answers that we got back on these. But basically, space is a very connecting topic because it is a big frontier. And most of us do love sci-fi, and most of us were inspired by real astronauts who risked their life to go up and really see what this is. So we found it to be a very connecting topic. So again, high expectations for what you do. So a lot of people, from the architects to the landscapers to the graphic designers to the motion graphics to the, R&D really worked on connecting the motion graphics with the physical motion, the ride group, who really developed another groundbreaking ride system. And I think that, probably the complaint is it's probably too real, right?
Yeah, I would not want to be a test dummy on that attraction. That thing, the claustrophobia, the centrifuge, I mean, it's intense. I think it's probably the most intense experience you'll find in a Disney park. It still, probably, today.
And it's real vertical motion, you get pushed back in your seat and you feel like you're going somewhere. And I think, that was the goal, was to make it like you're walking in the footsteps of real astronauts.
Success. I do want to talk about, before I let you go, about some, of course, you did incredible attractions for the Walt Disney Company, but currently you work in alternate reality games. You're the president and CEO of 42 Entertainment. And so what's going on in the world of AR games, or what is it? I think there are a lot of people who still don't know it all that well.
One of the reasons that I got out of Imagineering and went into gaming is because, we were right at the cusp of mobile really taking a huge role in our lives. And I think, back in the early days when Disney, I was on a lot of teams where Disney was talking about, well, what are we going to do with the internet, and what are we going to do with digital and what are we going to do with mobile? But at the time we were looking at broadband penetration numbers and, it's crazy stuff today. People are like, what? How old are you? But, it became clear to me that gaming, and especially pervasive online gaming, massively multiplayer online gaming, was really moving at lightning speed, and they were reaching an audience that Disney didn't really reach. And in fact, one of the very last things, I ran the concept studio at Imagineering for several years, and one of the last things that we developed was an attraction based on the number one PC game for 10 years, which was called Myst. But it was kind of a family-oriented puzzle mystery game that wasn't necessarily a first-person shooter game. And it was very popular because families would play it together. And so at the time they were working on Animal Kingdom, and people were like, well, what are we going to do with Discovery Island? And we were like, let's build Myst Island. Let's have a real online, offline, interactive attraction where you could work together with people all over the world. And one of the reasons we liked it is because it appealed to a group of people, for boys, it was 8 to 17, and for girls, maybe 11 to 17, who really, fell out of the Disney IP. And so like, you know, this was pre-Marvel and all that kind of stuff, but it was just kind of like, it was very attractive. So I got to know those guys. And so when we ended up the project didn't move forward, I actually left and went to develop a massively multiplayer online game. And I'm so glad I did, because, you know, it's an interesting thing, the language and the behaviors that we've developed, you know, as digital creatures. And I'm sure you're never without your phone being close to you. And most people, especially most younger people, are working on multiple devices at one time. Another inspiration for me getting out and getting into gaming is that when I was working on Mission Space, as you know, there's 4 positions in the capsule, and I wanted people to work together and affect the outcome. But when you're doing a classic Disney attraction that has to get 2,400 people through an hour, the inertia just pushed it towards always being the same, which is why I'm very excited about Galaxy's Edge, because I see a lot of programming in there, and that's where I think theme parks need to go. So anyway, I got out and went into gaming and learned that there's a whole different audience that values different things. You know, created our own real-time virtual photorealistic 3D engine, and kind of went from, you know, 90% brick and mortar to like 90% digital. And one of the things that kind of struck me, you know, having really observed, you know, people out and in a Disney environment for so many years, is that being in a completely virtual environment had limitations as well. You didn't necessarily have the same budget limitations, but you did have limitations in terms of interaction and where you could go, what you could do, and the value that it had. So after working on a massively multiplayer online game, I got together with some people from Xbox and some ex-Disney people who'd worked on Disney Quest and said, well, what if we use the game, the world as the game board, and the digital devices that people already have, you know, programmed into the fabric of their life? And what if you give them these rabbit holes, these opportunities to, you know, to interact with a fictional experience and have a real role in it and affect the outcome? What if you give them opportunities to do that on their own time and in their own way? And that's where alternate reality gaming came from. And, you know, we've been able to do some amazing things with all different kind of amazing story worlds, everything from Halo to Batman to Call of Duty, you know, just things that have a huge built-in audience. And then they have the ability with mixed reality is really what it is. It's a good mix. It's the right mix of digital and physical experiences. And that's where I think theme parks could learn a lot, you know, because gaming's coming at it from this end, theme parks are coming at it from this end, but there's this great space in the middle where people are going to authentically design for experiences that are both have physical components and also have digital components. And I think it's going to transform entertainment. That's what I think.
I'm not much of a gamer myself, but I'm always blown away by the fact. I mean, I enjoy almost all sorts of stuff in the entertainment industry, whether it's live or theme parks or, you know, live theater, theme parks, movies, whatever. So I'm always blown away that, like, the largest business within entertainment is video gaming. And it's outrageous. It's interesting to see how it's ending up in the theme parks these days. I think, you know, you say, well, everybody's got their smartphone, and it's true, but I feel like there's a large amount of people now who have it, but like aren't using it necessarily, you know, older people who aren't using it the way that younger people are. And I feel like that's probably the most difficult part right now, because even when it comes to, like, you know, using the My Disney Experience app or something.
As someone who's actually played through the My Disney, the Play app, both in Galaxy's Edge and all over the park, I think that, you know, there's so many considerations. If you go back to, you know, having been involved on a park level for, you know, Epcot and to some limited degree Tokyo Disneyland, but then other parks that didn't get built and major attractions, and thinking about all of the master planning that goes into it, I really feel like that the things that are going to win are things that are probably a mix of enterprise. Like, I think the Disney Magic Bands was definitely onto something. It's like, we're taking an experience and making it more user-friendly for you. It's like, well, it's easier to do banking today. Why shouldn't it be easier to go to a theme park? You know, and that was smart thinking. I think the idea of really where you can go with in terms of play, I think we're just starting to see scratching the surface. Like if you think about Hall of Presidents, the magic that when we were young and now the limitations of audio animatronics, but you think about these realistic holograms and these recreation from scratch, a digital human, so imagine a digital human Abraham Lincoln that, you with and interact with. I think that it's just now, I think, definitely the virus put a little kink in some innovation that's going on, but I think there's a lot of people that are working on really magical experiences that I'm sure Imagineers and others in the industry will take and use in interesting ways. But I also feel like the magic of theme parks and the magic of really creating immersive experiences can now be more local. I think location-based attractions and entertainment are starting to spring up everywhere, and they should, because technology is more affordable now. And, quite frankly, after this is all over, we're all going to be like, let's go somewhere. Let's do something. I don't care if we just drive 2 miles, let's go do something. Let's go. And I think that there's going to be an opportunity for a different type of location-based attraction and entertainment. And that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and it seems like Bob Iger's been talking a long time about augmented reality stuff for the park. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. And Susan, you are obviously super intelligent and have had an extraordinary career. And I'm sure we only hit the tip of the iceberg here, but I just wanted to be respectful of your time and thank you so much for coming on and talking about all of this stuff.
And definitely go see Rise of the Resistance when you get a chance.
Oh, I did. Yeah, it's unlike anything I've done. It's quite incredible. So
yeah. Once an Imagineer, always Imagineer. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Now, folks, if you haven't listened to last week's episode yet, be sure and check it out as we discussed the new live-action reimagining of Mulan. And don't forget that you can catch the latest Disney news every Sunday in the House of Mouse headlines. The easiest way to make sure you don't miss any of the magic is by subscribing to Disney Coast to Coast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Wherever you search, don't forget, it's Disney with a Z, Coast to Coast. Now, if you've been listening to Disney Coast to Coast for a long time but haven't yet checked out patreon.com/DisneyCTC, now would be a great time to do so. By becoming a member of the DCTC community at patreon.com/DisneyCTC, you're not only supporting the show and assuring more free episodes in the future, but you're also getting yourself exclusive bonuses. So if you haven't checked it out yet, head to patreon.com/DIZNEYCTC right now. And thanks in advance for considering becoming part of the community. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!
Thanks for listening to Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.
Disney Coast to Coast is produced and hosted by Jeff DePaoli. Learn more about the podcast and become a supporter at DisneyCoastToCoast.com.
That was great. There's nothing like getting behind the scenes info of our favorite attractions.
It honestly is like some of the best, especially as Disney fans who go to the park so often, hearing these stories and hearing a lot of the little minutia of the creation is so much fun. I absolutely enjoyed it. And hopefully all of you enjoyed it as well. Now, if you want to listen to more Disney Coast to Coast, if you're going over to your favorite podcast app, make sure you search Disney Coast to Coast with a Z. It's spelled with a Z. Disney Coast to Coast. Disney with a Z. Very important to remember. It's not spelled the normal way. It's spelled the Jeff DePaoli way, which is the important part. So make sure you do that. Make sure you subscribe. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. And hopefully we'll get Jeff on the show. We'll talk some more Disney goodness. But hopefully you enjoyed and have a great day.
See ya.